Hello everyone, my name is Dr. Shelley Brunt. I'm the Program Manager of the Bachelor of Arts Music Industry degree and an Associate Professor in RMIT's School of Media and Communication. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting today, the people of the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations. I acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the traditional and only custodians of country across Australia, having survived genocide, dispossession and colonisation. I recognise their continuous connection to land, waters and culture, and pay my respect to their elders past and present. Sovereignty has never been ceded. This land always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm delighted to see so many faces here for today's special event, presented by Always Live, APRA AMCOS, the Wheeler Centre, RMIT and RMIT Culture. Always Live is a statewide celebration of contemporary live music supported by the Victorian Government through Visit Victoria. RMIT Culture unites the university's creative programs and cultural collections, as well as the university's public cultural spaces, including the incredible Capitol Theatre that we're in here today. And it offers a curated program dedicated to building a community of culture and ideas with partners and collaborations, enabling today's opportunity to delve deeper into the processes and experiences behind Caroline Polachek's expression of art and future pop. Caroline Polachek is a singularity, one of music's most continually inventive pop auteurs, a shimmering ribbon of a voice that's immediately recognisable, a self-releasing independent artist, a crate digger, and a lifelong headphone listener who writes songs that literally fill stadiums. Her new album, Desire I Want to Turn Into You, is her 7th album, but the 2nd under her name. If 2019's Pang was an ephemeral crystalline document of risking everything for new love, Desire is Polachek in her most physical, turning up the temperature and trading tight narrative for visceral tone poetry. Desire is a constellation of big, potent songs that hit immediately, then stay with you and continue to echo and bloom. It's a canvas with earth and water and blood-tone colours splashed against it. Brodie Lancaster is hosting today's conversation with Caroline. Brodie is a pop culture connoisseur, podcaster, writer, essayist and author. Her criticism and features have been published in Vogue, The New York Times, The Guardian, Pitchfork, Rolling Stone, The Age, The Saturday Paper, Nine Papers, The Monthly, and more. She is the co-host of See Also, a weekly pop culture podcast, and the author of the 2017 memoir, No Way, Okay Fine. But I believe her finest achievement is being a star graduate of our very own Bachelor of Communications Media degree here at RMIT. Today we also thank Nicole from Stage Left for interpreting for us today. I threw that in there, I hope you get that. Now, please join me in warmly welcoming Caroline Polachek and Brodie Lancaster to the stage.
Let's try one. Let's try one more time. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Shelley, for that introduction. Caroline, I'm so excited about this hour we're about to spend together, talking about your lyrics, your performance, but I'd like to start with a visual. I think there was a visual with your album cover up here. Desire, I want to turn into you. On the cover, you're on the floor of a subway, headphones on, crawling towards something sandy. Can you tell me a little bit about that image and what it represents for this collection of songs?
Of course, and I'm so happy we're starting there. First of all, I just want to say good hi and good afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone who came and packed the house today to come hang out with us. I love this opening question because I really did feel like this album kind of spilled into the world with some songs and some fragments of visuals coming out long before I announced the album itself. But the release of the album cover, for me personally, kind of marked like, this is it. Now we're in this era. We're in this, this moment of a desire I want to turn into you officially. Building out the album cover was a bit like fumbling in the dark, actually, at first. I did all the photography across this album with an incredible British photographer named Aidan Zamiri, who has become one of my closest friends now over the process of working on this album. And up until this point, we had only shot single artwork, which was quite as well. Like I said, this album really kind of spilled into the world messily. The single artwork was shot before we even knew what we were doing with the cover, and that was because we started working during the pandemic and decided to shoot some press photos, and those photos were just too good to use for press, so we used them as single artwork. But they were these really tightly composed, very graphic photographs of me on black backdrops, with, of course, a series of objects or kind of color coding that were connected to each song. But they were very kind of, a very tight series and all obviously connected because of the kind of black background composition. And I said, in a lot of ways, the album is so environmental that I want to kind of do the opposite for the actual album cover and have there be as much information in the environment as we can possibly pack in. And to actually draw this clear distinction between the songs being a part of this greater whole, where the songs are almost like these zoom-ins on something much bigger. And so Aidan and I started speaking about what are the situations that feel incredibly dynamic of my life. Like, what are the environments I find myself in that I feel completely overtaken? And one thing that we spoke about was how I feel the most overtaken, like by listening to music when I'm in the train, always. I don't know why. I think I've cried the most times listening to music. Does that resonate with any of you guys? And I think there's really something to it, because the train, psychologically, I'm into Jungian psychology, but you're going down. You're going down into a tunnel, or going down into a transportive place where you can't actually see the outside world that you're passing through. You're very often cut off from your phone service, so you're really going down into, you're in this holding zone. And you're surrounded by strangers, which sort of reminds you of your place in the world. It takes you out of your head, out of the kind of whatever drama that's going on in your life, and reminds you that you're one of billions of people in the world. And you're also moving very fast. And I think all these things lend to this really emotional experience of music. And I kind of wanted to not just capture that feeling, but kind of do the Desire train. It's not any train. If you look closely, any of the details are kind of tweaked and modified. We're in this kind of slippery place between dreams and reality, between ancient history and contemporary technology. And this scene was the best place to embed that, as well as, of course, a couple nods to some lyrics in the song, and of course, fitting a handful of my closest friends into the photo as well.
As you're describing that, I also had the thought that there's nowhere that regular non-musician people feel more like we're in a music video than when we're on a train, looking at, like, you're the main character every time.
I love this phrase, main character syndrome, because it's one thing that films ironically cannot give us, but I think pop music especially can.
And it's inherent, I feel like, from birth. I was babysitting a 4-year-old once who was just staring out the window, singing along to a song on the radio, and I was like, that's real. That I want to do that.
Oh yeah. I remember learning so much about adult concepts like heartbreak and infidelity and really feeling it as a kid, even though I had zero emotional base of reference for these things. But yeah, you definitely you feel like 6 years old, like what's up.
Yeah. Okay, so that image came a little later, but the songs on this record and in all your music are often defined or like positioned in like a very specific physical place, whether it's a city, an island, something kind of volcanic or natural. Do you locate not just kind of the emotional space, but that physical, tangible? Are you visualizing where the song lives as you're writing it?
Yes, and sometimes it comes down to more micro things like textures and objects, and sometimes it is a whole space. When I'm working with my very often co-producer, Danielle Harl, we talk a lot about the acoustics of the space that a song is in, especially when it comes to vocal production. We'll talk about reverbs as being bathroomy or woody or impossible, often evoking impossibly vast spaces or underwater. I think having a clear sense when you're even in the studio of what the acoustic environment of a song, especially now that we're in a digital world of making music, when you have every possibility open to you at every stage of the process until a song's actually delivered, which is quite maddening, actually. I can see some of you smiling and you know what I'm talking about. That having all those infinite decision-making process can actually be really helped by some degree of space and tangibility and a sense of what are the textures, what are the acoustic properties of this piece of music we're building.
I can imagine it must help to, when there's so much possibility, you might not know what the song is yet, but you can kind of know what it's not. You're like, it's not that place.
Well, the not is very dangerous.
Yeah.
The not can be very dangerous. I think there's definitely been moments in my life as a songwriter and producer where I've gone into things and been like, it's not this. And the not doesn't really help you at the end of the day. I heard once that Francis Ford Coppola goes into each film with like a single word. That's sort of the mantra. It might be something like red. But that word guides his decision-making process, and I find that very inspiring.
Okay, the record opens with, and is named for a line in Welcome to My Island, which begins with this unreal vocal delivery, as so many of your songs do. And I've heard you speak before about kind of wordless, I guess, vocalizing is often the place where every song begins.
Yes.
And is it right that lyrics are often like much further down the line?
Yeah. I'm a painfully slow lyricist. It takes me a really long time to get lyrics in place that I'm happy with. And I also really struggle to generate lyrics on command. I think the way a lot of other, especially living in LA and working in an environment where there's a paradigm of what we call topliners, pop writers who get in the studio and finish a song in a day, sometimes finish 3 songs in a day. And I'm absolutely not that. I need to take things away and stew on them by myself and try out a million ideas until something feels right. But as you said, I am a melodic writer. The singing comes first, the melody, and with that, the kind of dynamic and phonetic inflections. Sometimes a melody wants pressure from a consonant or the openness of a vowel in certain places. And that usually comes through for me on the first draft of writing a melody, and I'm very loyal to it. So of course, knowing that you need a plosive, which is a P or a B, something that sound like that, knowing you need that in a certain place, or that the vowel E works but the vowel O doesn't have to give you that same feeling, creates so much limitation in the writing process. But I really believe in seeing it through, because I think there is something really special when you're improvising melody. It's so full of expression. And I often feel like as a lyricist, my job is to decode the emotion that was in that original take, and not just decode what I'm trying to say, but also what is this character, what is the kind of emotional archetype of this piece of music, and be not just as loyal, but as kind of creative as possible in discovering what and who that is.
If the kind of sitting in a session and having to come out with a song is like the worst case scenario, what is kind of the best case for as far as putting a song together with Danny, for example? You know, are you creating that kind of melodic structure and going away and listening to it and coming up with the lyrics later on?
You know, there's really no formula. Every process breeds its own unique results, and every sketch asks for its own process. I love working collaboratively, mostly because it prevents me from procrastinating, but also because I find that having a social energy in the room actually does go into the music. I definitely have different modes I get into when I'm writing and producing on my own that are kind of more thoughtful and lunar and brooding, and you can definitely hear that on certain songs. But I really, I guess for me the ideal process would be starting with something energetic, either a series of chords or a groove, and then sketching a couple pieces melodically, and then maybe building out some kind of rough structure of sections, and then maybe completing a melody over that, and then maybe going back and revising the structure, adding some more vocal parts, and then entering this simultaneous process of solitary lyric writing and collaborative production that ideally gets finished right around the time people are ready to mix.
Conveniently.
That would be it, yeah. Dream world, dream scenario.
I realize this probably should have been like my first question, but sometimes I speak to artists who kind of draw a line under a song or a record, and they say, interpret it how you will, my work here is done, kind of thing. And sometimes artists really want to be a part of that conversation and really make their intentions clear. Where do you kind of sit on that spectrum when people want to talk to you about your lyrics, as I am doing here?
I mean, I really see both sides of it. I have so much reverence for the creative thing that happens in the mind of the listener, to the point that I actually do think about very often leaving space in lyrics for dreaming on behalf of the listener, and also for, I think songs like my song I Believe, for example. When I was writing that song, I intentionally wanted to leave space where this could be a song about so many things at the same time. Although it's a song about a very specific thing for me, I was like, okay, I want this to be a song that you could listen to the last day of summer camp. I want this to be a song you could listen to when somebody you love passes away. I want this to be a song you could play at a wedding. And letting a song be a vessel that can hold as many profound meanings as possible was kind of part of the experiment for me in writing that one. But so in that sense, I would never want to kind of say that there is one way to listen to the song and this is it, and I want to be the kind of didactic master of what the song means. And at the same time, I do think that culture right now is in a crisis of literalism, that especially in the realm of art and music, there's this, I don't know if it's on behalf of journalism or if it's because things are speeding up so fast online and we want to be able to formulate our opinions faster than ever and then move on. But I do feel like there's this idea that songs mean things. Songs can be reduced to a one-liner elevator pitch about what it means and what it's about. And really, music is so visceral and so completely abstract. It always has been. And I think it's very damaging for the way we experience art and make art to be living in a world where a very literal interpretation is demanded of art. So I try to resist that wherever I can.
I'm picturing like headlines as you're describing that, like an idea that an artist has made something.
The breakup album, the sobriety album, like, you know what that is. We know what those lyrics are going to be.
Yeah.
I think mystery is one of the most compelling, not just mystery, but discovery,
And it changes as a listener, the longer you spend time with it and think about it, like the intention, the connection you have to a piece of work changes. Yeah. Well, one song that people were very eager to kind of understand the meaning and the translation of was Bunny as a Rider. The first taste that we got of this record back in 2021, and Bunny was this like enigma, like elusive and hot and cool. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about writing her, this character, and also what this song kind of meant as the first taste of the record when it came out?
Thank you so much. I love this question. Well, Bunny as a Writer in some ways kind of taught me about what the lyrical technique was going to be across this album. Because my solo debut album, Hang, was very narrative. It was a very kind of storybook format, where sometimes it was personal and sometimes it felt, within the realm of dreams and fantasy, but it was always narrative. Even the arc of the entire album actually follows a kind of emotional narrative. And this time around, I just wanted to kind of like mush it up into a clay ball and like throw it at a wall. Like, I wasn't really interested in storytelling. I kind of felt sick of storytelling. I was much more interested in the legacy of artists like Missy Elliott or Nirvana, these lyricists who were working with tone poetry to give us these like delicious, addictive series of words that paint pictures that have so much energy in them and also so much culture in them without needing to tell a story. And Welcome to My Island had a bit of that in it as well, which already pre-existed before Bunny, but when Bunny as a Writer entered this world, I suddenly saw very clearly the connection between these two songs, which are just these bratty, stupid, and I say stupid like in a really good way, very abstract, very phonetic approaches to songwriting, and I got really excited by that. And but to go back to Bunny as a Writer specifically, Bunny is, texturally about just being completely unavailable and unbeholden to anything, and maybe for me that was a bit of a fantasy. This kind of mode of having no obligations and maybe you have them but you're not showing up for them, and how kind of like flirty that attitude is as well, and just about disappearing.
She leaves her phone at home. She's like,
no, her phone's on her, she's just not responding.
Do not disturb 24/7.
Yeah.
Okay, so she's a very cool customer, but a very overwhelming sentiment on Desire I want to turn into you. From that title onwards, really captures that feeling of wanting and being very clear about it. Can you tell us a little bit about the time that you were spending in your life when you were writing this record, and what were those kind of like major feelings or emotions that you needed to capture lyrically?
Well, the first thing I think of is catharsis, because I began these songs right like weeks before the pandemic hit. Bunny as a Writer and Smoke were written, I think, like the last week of January 2020. And then I went through a phase of essentially not writing anything at all for about 6 months. And I think it's because I had already gotten these glimpses of the album with Welcome to My Island, Bunny as a Writer and Smoke. I knew that this album wanted to be this hot-blooded, high-energy, very beat-driven thing. And of course, when we were all in this collective moment of not leaving the house, not knowing what the next day was going to bring, and also being glued to our phones, just passively waiting for instruction, I knew that that was not the headspace that could be loyal to this music. And so because I believed in the spirit of that music, I said, I'm going to keep that on ice until I'm ready to meet it where it wants to be and not try and force it, because I know I can't force it. So the summer of 2020, in July, I went on a road trip to Italy because a friend of mine is doing a PhD there, and he was like bored out of his mind. He said, please come keep me company. And so I went with a handful of friends, and something about being in Italy felt so connected to the ancient history of disaster. Maybe both because, Vesuvius, the eruption of Vesuvius is so part of the kind of narrative of that part of the world, but also there were active volcanoes when I was there. Mount Etna was erupting lava the whole time I was staying in Sicily, and I was so inspired by the history of humanity in the face of these violent natural disasters, of which I consider COVID part of, and what it does to our sense of spirituality, our sensuality, what we want out of culture, which for me was, partying, physicality, sensuality, humor, all these things that we've been missing. And also I think it was interesting seeing its relationship with, religion and, what's the word I'm looking for? And superstition, I guess. These different kind of theories that were emerging, everything from like QAnon to wellness to feeling like that was kind of connected to this deep, almost history of Catholicism somehow, like you must repent for your sins, these natural disasters have come to you through, anyway, it was just, I was steeping in all these kinds of forces, ancient and modern, and I suddenly felt like the spirit of this album actually needed to extend way further than this kind of little braggy zone that I'd set up for it, that it needed to contain something quite ancient in its sense of vitality. So the second I got back from Italy, the song Billions came out of me. I believe showed up, Sunset showed up, and I sort of proceeded in this way of trying to see if I could set up a world where this sort of ancient perspective could live within the kind of humor and also the kind of emotional frailty all at the same time. And that was actually quite a big challenge.
You mentioned sunset, and there are all different kinds of love expressed on the record, and the image that you invoke in that song of a hand being a safety net is one that I always come back to and really connect to. Can you tell me a little bit about the kind of romance that you're calling to on that song?
Yeah, I think that's one of my favorite lyrics on the album, so I'm grateful that you brought it up. The lyric is, so many stories we've been told about a safety net, but when I look for it, it's just a hand that's holding mine. And again, I think, 2020, 2021 really taught us that lesson, which is all these structures that we have, all this unconscious faith in, all these kind of institutions of government and medicine, education, etc., like completely crumble. And that the real safety net is the people around us who love and who love us. And Sunset in particular, I really wanted to write that song from an adult perspective. This sense of having seen things and having lived through, you're imperfect. I think that's the difference between a kind of teenage perspective in writing and an adult one, is that I think there's an acknowledgement that you never will be perfect, that the world will never be perfect, and c'est la vie, and life goes on, and Sunset I really wanted to encapsulate that attitude of like, fuck it, pour me another glass, let's ride. And so that's what Sunset is about. Is about the love that lasts through ups and downs.
And as you were listing before, the idea of like superstition in mythology and things like that, the thing that connects all of that to things like QAnon is also like this kind of desperate, like...
You guys have QAnon in Australia?
Oh yeah, unfortunately we do. It's almost like a historical like need for just like an explanation, or someone to like tell us why something is happening. Yeah. Okay, so another kind of love that we can't ignore is, or an expression of love is horniness, which brings us to So Hot You're Hurting My Feelings. And I feel like I remember where I was the first time I heard this song. Like I listened to it so often during those lockdown years when you were just, I went through phases of listening to that, and also that Perfume Genius record that came out, where I just was like, it's so painful to not be able to touch anybody this time, and listening to this music as well. but I enjoyed it much more than I just made it sound. You did some annotated lyrics for that song on Genius, and against the line, "You're the only one who knows me, babe," you kind of referenced a data dump that you tend to do when you're first getting to know someone. You're doing a kind of show and tell of your favorite songs or art or books. What are some of those things that you kind of share so that someone knows you?
I mean, there's so much coding that goes into sharing art and music mostly, but sharing your taste with someone, and also kind of trying to read into what kind of a person, the other person is by what they're sharing. I don't necessarily mean like, here's my life story. It's like, I'm sending you this because I think I'd like you. I'm sending you this because I think you'd like it. There's so much information there. You're making inferences about that person's taste. You're putting yourself on the line for it, yeah. And so the stakes are quite high. But I guess for me, it just takes the form of a whole lot of YouTube links. Yeah.
I really want to know what the number one is, but it's specific to the person.
It's completely specific to the person, yeah. And I think mirroring is such an interesting part of not just flirting, but falling in love as well. Because you not only form an idea of the other person that's not necessarily real, but you're creating a version of yourself that's tailored to what you think they might like. And that's one of the most profound things about falling in love is often you become that person. And yeah, so that process of imagination is very powerful.
Getting to know the version of you that is like now.
Yeah, and people create them without meaning to too, which is wild.
Yeah. We chatted a little bit about this backstage, but I heard you on a podcast a little while ago speaking about doing parts of the album release stuff yourself, editing clips for social media rather than entrusting it to someone else and being in the position of always giving feedback. And you said something that has really stuck with me about how it's fundamentally kind of messed up or puts your brain in like a really messed up place to go into a creative task as the critic, looking for errors, looking for something to fix or change, and it kind of blew my mind. And it put words to something I think a lot of us probably have always felt and felt limited by. So I'm curious to know what role the critic plays in your writing and your performance and your lyrics and your music.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you touched on that, thank you. I guess at this point of where I am as an artist, the biggest bottleneck in terms of my capability is my time and my own time management. I had a conversation, this is kind of a side note, it's something I think about all the time. A friend of mine was a creative director, I'm not going to name names, but he was a creative director who was doing creative direction for a bunch of artists, and he said, like, cynically back in 2015, the biggest bottleneck for artists is the fact they can only be in one place at one time. Like, if we could make a billion clones of Beyonce, I think how much more money could be made. But she can only be in one place, and she has to sleep, and she has to eat, and all these things create limitations on what Beyonce's company can do. This was not Beyonce's creative director, by the way. People like Googling. But this person went on to actually invent an AI artist that could operate without needing a body or eating and could be online 24/7. I was like, oh, fuck, okay. But we are human artists, and time is of the essence, and I have felt under increasing pressure this last year to delegate. And delegate, tasks like social media, like editing, making selections of photographs, all this kind of stuff that could maybe be handed to someone who you trust. And I have tried it in various capacities, and I find it doesn't work for me. And not just because I'm a control freak, but because I think it does something to my sense of imagination and creativity, which is, as you said, it forces me into a criticality mindset. It forces me into looking at things with the presumption that something is wrong that I have to fix. And I think when you start looking at your own project, constantly in searching for errors or searching for mistakes, and fearing the effects of someone else making a mistake on your behalf, it really messes with your internal relationship to creativity. So I think for that sake alone, to keep my mind out of a problem detection mindset, I prefer to do stuff myself. So I'm instead searching for what I like and cutting out the piece I like. I'm not searching for mistakes.
I was thinking about this recently in terms of like the idea of writer's block, and I was just kind of imagining like my inner critic who is there on the blank page as someone I can send out of the room and like call on them when necessary. Do you do that? Is that ever a part of your songwriting process, or does that ever come? Do you ever invite the critic into the studio or no?
No. And don't take this personally, but I think it's maybe because music journalism is ultimately not where I see the real form of actual judgment. For me, it's much more, do the people I think have good taste and are cool, and they're usually people I know. Would they like this? Would they think this is lame? Will audiences think I'm repeating myself? Will they think this is too different than anything I've done before? I think more along those lines and less about critics, which who knows if that's better or better or worse.
I mean, it served you well.
We'll see.
I was curious because I know that there are songwriters in the audience. If you perhaps have any kind of advice or tips for kind of getting into that like pure creator headspace, maybe when self-doubt or like self-criticism is creeping in.
Ooh, I love this question. I think don't ever be worried about the official way of doing anything. There is no official way of doing anything. Don't worry about what gear you're using. There's so much gear fetishism, none of it matters. The best songs are like written on an iPhone. And don't ever doubt your process because of your environment or your equipment. I would say take notice of what processes work for you. When a song spills out of you, take stock afterwards. What was happening that worked? Was it a specific way I had laid out that text edit document that made it really easy for my eyes to jump back and forth through different ideas? Was it that I had been taking notes prior to the song and I had come into the session with material? Was it morning? Was it night? Take note of your personal rhythms and what works for you. And they will shift over the course of your life. They won't always stay the same. But your process won't be like anyone else's, so pay attention to it and have a lot of respect for it.
On that idea of kind of you realizing that the best way to go into your projects is to kind of take on all of the tasks yourself, or as many as you can, without being an AI Caroline. An audience question that came through was someone was curious, what do you like most about editing and directing your music videos?
Oh my gosh. I get the hugest thrill the first time I get to see footage back after a shoot, because it feels like the biggest coup to have been working for weeks in pre-production using, animatic sketches or mood boards or lighting references and seeing everything in these parts and in these descriptions. And sometimes it feels, and I'm sure anyone, who makes things in the room can relate to what I'm saying, it feels like you're playing a game like you're back in like 3rd grade and you're trying to convince someone that your invisible friend exists. I think very often making things that require a team are very much like this. There's this process of like, no, he's right here, he's got red hair, his name is Jim, he's really good at talking the language of alligators, and you just have to if you have to say it, you say it enough and you say it with enough clarity, then it becomes real. And for me, that's what making music videos feels like. Is it starts with something as abstract as a melodic sketch, and then turns into a song, and then turns into a mixed and mastered piece of music, and then turns into a keynote PDF of reference images, and then turns into a bunch of meetings, and negotiations of people's fees and delivery dates, and then suddenly you're on set and you're like, oh God, is this even gonna work? And very controversially at my art school, I was making music videos as my as my projects, which the students and the teachers wrote off as, this is not art, this is your hobbyist music project. And so I had to stand there and speak about, culture creation and postmodernism and, and somehow tie it into like Fluxus and, video art and commercial language, whatever. I was making music videos. But at the time, it was, 2006, 2007, and camera phones didn't exist yet. So I was fully taking advantage of the school's media lab to rent their, handheld camcorders and use their editing decks and really milking their 24-hour policy in the computer lab and just doing all-nighters there editing. And I actually credit that video art program for teaching music production, because at the time we were editing in Final Cut 5 or whatever it was, which had the exact same visual interface as Pro Tools. So by learning video editing, I was actually learning audio production without realizing it, because it's the exact same workflow. So I think any of you that are audio producers that have considered making videos or vice versa, you will find that it has a very direct translation both in the way you think and the way it looks actually. So don't hold back if you're inspired to try.
I was like nodding so enthusiastically, just thinking of like going to RMIT and just going into like a little basement and renting out like cases of camera equipment.
Yeah.
With tapes.
Now it's all just in your pocket.
Yeah, truly. Okay, one other question, which I guess that came in from the audience, which I suppose is about the idea of like picking what works and maybe what doesn't, is about the decisions that go into like a track list and a final order of songs on the record. Was there ever a world in which maybe some of the songs on Desire weren't going to be there, or like didn't make the original shortlist?
Desire is the only album, and I can't tell if this is a good thing or a horrible thing, it's the only album I've ever made where there were no outtakes. And it was because I was so under the gun, scheduling-wise, to deliver this album, because, as I said, I didn't make anything for about 6 months during the pandemic. And as I started getting back into a flow as a songwriter, and the album starts coming into focus, live venues open up again.
Yeah, you were touring.
And suddenly I get a call from my manager saying, Caroline, I want to book you at this 6,000 person amphitheater in LA. I think we can sell it out. And I was like, the last show I sold was 1,000 people. He goes, things have changed during the pandemic. We've got more listeners now. Let's see what happens.
I looked down for
It was
2 years.
from 1,000 to 6,000, and we did indeed sell it out, and I was terrified. I had been on stage in a year and a half, and then suddenly was playing the biggest audience of my life. I hadn't even seen a crowd of people in a long time, so I had to put the album on ice, put together a band, put together visual production, and from that point on, I've been touring steadily without any significant breaks for almost 2.5 years. So Desire Want to Turn Into You had to be made while I was touring Pang, which was, of course, a year and a half delayed. Even the mixing was done remotely. Album art was shot in a brief snatch of time between tours. It was all, I didn't have much time to work with, so every idea that was put on the table for that album made the cut and was finished to the end.
Is it right that this is kind of the coming towards the end of the Desire touring as well?
It's so surreal. This week is the final shows on the Desire tour, which is quite wild for me, because we're touring. I don't want to give too much away for anyone who's coming to the shows tonight or tomorrow, but we've been touring with a volcano set piece, which was of course inspired by the experiences I had being in Italy that I was speaking about. But it's a huge volcano, which is starting to feel like a band member. It's been all around the world with us. The crew names have their own. Yeah, the crew names actually has their own names for the individual volcanic peaks, which is quite cute. But this is its final hurrah this week.
Where will she go next?
I mean, our tour manager wanted to burn her after I'm going to keep the fabric. I want to do something with the fabric. I haven't decided yet, but when we are going to we're going to just destroy her through skeleton armature after this week.
I mean, it would be very fitting for her to die in a fire, you know?
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie, Side Note, Fire of Love? Like,
Oh, I want to see it so bad.
yeah, volcanologists in the 70s who were like in love with each other and volcanoes.
And don't they like die as well at the end?
Yeah, but that's how they wanted to go. It would have been like awful for them to have been like, to have gotten sick at home or something. Like they were in an ash cloud in Japan. That's what they wanted. I sound like an absolute heinous person. But yes, I think that maybe that's like what you watch on your as the volcano set piece says goodbye. Okay, I want to talk a little about collaboration, but maybe first, I would love to know, like, when you were first starting to make music, who were some of the lyricists that you looked to or were inspired by?
Whoa. I'm trying to think, when was I first trying to make music? I recently found some lyrics that I would have written as like a 10-year-old. They were terrible.
They all about heartbreak.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So I guess I struggle to pinpoint at what moment. For me, the personal high watermark of the person I always compare myself to in the studio and just to kind of bully myself is songwriter Paddy McAloon of the band Prefab Sprout. He's my favorite lyricist, and writes with so much nuance and attitude and playfulness and like self-hatred and euphoria. And anyway, I always kind of check in on myself. I'm like, do I think Paddy would like these lyrics? So yeah, that's it. He's my number one.
One of your collaborators is Charlie XCX, and I heard or read that you two first met in Australia, is that right?
We did, yeah.
Yeah. What kind of drew you together and kind of forged the basis of this kind of creative friendship that you have now?
So Charlie and I met in 2010 in Australia on, I think, Laneway tour. I forget if it was Laneway or Parklife. And that was back in the era where she was like singing with her backing tracks on an iPod and wearing like rainbow colored foam sneaker platforms that were like, you know, rainbow stripes at like this high. She had huge hair.
Yes.
And I was so amazed by her and also by her confidence and this kind of lane in music that she was occupying, where it was kind of like not punk, but like extremely pop and kind of electronic at the same time. And Charlie was just so fun. And then we kind of, you know, the lanes of our music, because I was very decidedly in an indie rock Brooklyn band at the time, our paths didn't really cross naturally until 2017, which was right around the time that my band dissolved and I went solo. And I came into the orbit of the PC Music Collective, a group of electronic artists based out of London that Charlie also works with as well. And I ended up in the studio with Charlie XCX, producer A.G. Cook, and me, while the two of them were making Charlie's album Pop 2. And there was something going on. I mean, I was getting divorced. A.G. was going through a breakup, and Charlie was going through some like major soul searching, and the three of us were just like hanging on by a thread spiritually. We weren't sleeping. We were so like manic and twitchy, and we just poured everything out in the studio. Charlie and A.G. pretty much did leave the studio for 2 weeks. They made that whole album in 2 weeks. I've never seen anything like it. So I spent a couple of sleepless nights just hanging out in that studio with them in New York. All of us just feeling very raw and very crazy. And we've been like very close ever since then.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's
say.
a deep bonding experience.
Yeah, to be together in those moments, it's like forged in fire.
Oh yeah. But we've collaborated, I think, 4 times now,
Yeah.
which is quite cool because, you know, I think the traditional expectation of a collab is it's this big, you know, Marvel style thing that just happens once and then all the co-branding happens and then it's over. But Charlie's just like, let's do it again. Get on track.
Yeah.
Let's do it again, which is quite cool.
Yeah. One of those songs that you collaborated on was New Shapes, which also brought the two of you together with Christine and the Queens. I remember seeing the Chris tour at the Forum where you're playing tonight, I think a few months before lockdown, and it was one of those shows that I was like, oh, at least I'm like alive at the same time as this artist. On New Shapes, each of you kind of wrote a verse about relationships, and I was curious to know, working together, were you doing it long distance? Like, did you get an insight into their different creative processes? Like, how were you similar and different as songwriters?
That song was written during that same like cursed / blessed window that Bunny's Rider was written in. I think it was actually that same week, last week of January 2020. And I received the song from Charlie, and she was like, I want to do this like huge 80s power pop trio song. Here's my chorus and my verse on it. Go ahead and jump on. And I was really feeling it. I rented a studio and I was there by myself, and it was, LA winter, so you'd see all the stars, and I was sort of going in and out of the studio that night, just really feeling the kind of like high frequency energy of the song. And I wrote this verse, recorded it, was so proud of it, sent it over to Charlie, and Charlie was like, I guess I didn't tell you, the song's about wanting an open relationship. And I was like, she's like, yeah, I'm really sorry, can you just redo all your lyrics to make it about wanting an open relationship? So I ended up FaceTiming with Chris, and I called him up and I was like, bro, did you receive the memo about this song? And he was like, no, and I've already written my lyrics and they're not about wanting an open relationship. And Chris was like, do you want an open relationship? And I was like, I don't. and the two of us just were like, well, we'll give it a try. So he goes off and writes the lyrics, I wrote the lyrics, I send mine in, and Charlie was like, Caroline, I've been listening to your original Scratch demo, and I'm actually addicted to it now, and I love the changes you made, but I really want to use the original. So anyway, New Shapes is a song where all three of us are actually singing about completely different things. That's why it's New Shapes and it's not New Shape.
Yeah.
It's plural. We contain multiplicities, but the vocal performances from all three of us were just so much fun to finally get to do live.
And the video is so fun as well.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I will say it's scary as hell to be dancing in a room with Chris because he's such
I can imagine.
an incredible, and Charlie is too. So I was very nervous at those rehearsals, but he's out there.
Yeah. Okay, so there are a lot of collaborations in your musical history, and you guested on other tracks, but I didn't kind of realize because of that Grimes was the first artist you ever invited onto one of yours.
Grimes and Dido, yes.
Yeah, and Dido. Did Grimes come first?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. I'm not omitting Dido, I would never. But I was curious to know what your relationship to Claire and her music has been over the years.
So kind of like Charlie, Claire and I met around that exact same time, around 2010, which is interesting because I think we kind of trace the DNA of kind of like ephemeral outsider electronic pop, at least in the kind of species that all three of us are kind of related to, kind of back to that moment in time, where like, Electroclash was like decidedly over, and indie was still going on, EDM was like beginning to happen, but yet there was this third way.
Featuring that like famous Grimes set at South by when it's just her and a keyboard, and it's like similar to Charlie and the iPod, like you could do a lot with like very little.
And in a way where you're not really attempting to make official music, you're just making like the music that you like. And so I met Claire at a rave in Brooklyn one night, and we stayed in touch kind of peripherally. Like we'd kind of cross paths once every year or so at various like South by Southwest or parties and things like that. And we're just really supportive admirers of each other's work. And I guess about 2 years ago we started DMing, because we sent each other music a lot. Started DMing that we should do something together of our own. And we kept trying to make time to work together in the studio, and our schedules were so chaotic we couldn't make it happen. And then I started writing Fly to You, and it sounded like nothing else on the album. It didn't have the kind of like earthy, bodied quality that the rest of the album had. It felt really like up here, you know, with this beat that like almost has no low end at all. Everything's really like really lightweight happening up here with so much space for vocals and chords and synths. And I was like, oh, this is really interesting because this home is kind of quite hard and quite soft at the same time. And it felt like the perfect place to try and work with Claire. So I sent over to her, I think I sent her like a video over IGDM. I sent her a video and just like vibing out in front of it. I said, do you like this? And she's like, I love it, let's do it. So a few months later, we were both in LA, and she invited me over to her house, and she has a bedroom with a studio set in her bedroom, just really simple but like really good equipment. And so we just hung out in her room, writing her part, recording it together. She had this like nitro grade cold brew coffee, and we had way too much of it. And we were up till about 8 a.m. just like.
Either we dilute your cold brew, would that be right?
You know, I can't even touch cold brew most of the time because I'm so sensitive to it. Like I look at it and I hurts. But yeah, so we just got like, yeah, we had the most beautiful time just like writing her lyrics and also just watching her record herself. And, you know, she did all her vocal production. Most of it was done in the moment, doing her delay and reverb and compression and getting everything exactly the way she likes it. And I will say it's pretty magical because the kind of grime sound that we're all so familiar with has such a technological feel to it. But I will say when she sings, it sounds like that. When she sings like just out into the room, it sounds like that. It's incredible. And I got those same goosebumps working with Dido because when I eventually reached out to Dido to invite her on the song as well, Dido did the same thing. She invited me over to her house. So I actually unplugged my own home studio rig and brought it to Dido's house and set it up on her porch, where we recorded her outside at her place. But hearing Dido sing just out into the open air, it's Dido. She sounds like that, and it's just so incredible to hear these kind of cultural, worlds that these artists have built just so simply come out of their mouths.
They just exist, they're already there.
Yeah.
I have no idea how, but we've only got a couple of minutes left. This has flown by. So I'm going to stick to kind of my final question. Don't worry, no long preamble from me. I would really love to know, Caroline, what the role or the purpose of pop music is, or what you hope for it.
Well, the words pop music are something that I can never actually define. I think interestingly, to take right now as an example, the sound that I personally associate with pop music, like the kind of 2015, Katy Perry, Max Martin sound of pop music doesn't really exist anymore. So really I've come to define pop music as just potent music culture. That it has nothing to do with the sound of the music, it's like the cultural potency of something that makes it pop music, and not just music that's generating pop culture, which I think makes it distinctly different from how the experimental community works, or the classical community works, or jazz, which are less interested in generating, visual and social culture. But anyway, the role of it, I think, is to harmonize you with the world around you, whether that's giving you a confidence boost or giving you aesthetic clothing you can wear to feel like you belong, or giving you a narrative of I'm hurting too, your hurting is okay. It's a way of harmonizing our insides with the kind of brutality of the world we live in.
I can think of no better place to end. I feel like this just... Thank you all so much for being here, and please join me in thanking Caroline.